So youth unemployment is not just a failure of government or a failure of employers not hiring, or it's a wicked and very complex problem, right? It's a failure of the labor market. A young woman selling amagwinya and ditamati lemaskopasi at the corner, you can't say is an entrepreneur. Right? It's subsistence. They're trying to feed their family. Youth unemployment is a wicked problem. It's a dynamic problem. It keeps changing. It's got multiple roots. So if you come with a set framework, you actually can't solve it because it keeps changing.
What role does immigration, illegal, legal, play in unemployment? Welcome back to Palatable Politics, a show where we make politics palatable. With me, your host, TJ. Welcome to the show. In today's session, we're going to be discussing youth employment jobs, how you and I can get involved, and what's being done. Here to give us insight is the Chief Government Relations Officer, Mosuoe Sekonyela, from Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator. Welcome to the show. Can you let us know how Harambee came about, objectives, origin, what you guys are trying to achieve?
Thanks, TJ. Harambee is about a 15-year-old organization. We are a not-for-profit organization that was set up by business, actually. At the time, there were about 5 big corporates in South Africa in 2011 who were effectively struggling to find young people to fill their entry-level jobs. And it was a bit of a conundrum because even then, our youth unemployment was already high. So they came together and incidentally with government at the time to say, how could we ready young people for pipelines for business? Young people that would go into the human capital pipelines of businesses and become meaningfully engaged employees. And effectively, and I'll use these words a bit throughout our conversation, is we were thinking at that time of the jobs as the demand. So where employers sit. Employers have needs, so we call that the demand. That's where the jobs sit. And then the young people are the supply, right? So you have to figure out a way of connecting the demand and the supply. And we realize actually that's where the critical mismatch was, is that young people were not ready enough for what employers were saying they were looking for. Even if it was young people that came out with the right qualifications and the right trainings, employers were still saying these young people are not ready. So we spent a ton of time with employers to understand, what do you mean when you say they're not ready? Because they've got the qualifications, the skilling system has done its job. So
practically, what does it mean?
What does it mean? And in effect, we found out that at the time they were starting to describe different things to us, like a young person who's got the will, the right kind of energy, the right attitude when they come into the job. A young person who comes early, right? Who arrives early and is punctual. So they were describing these behaviors effectively. And so when we then said, how can we incubate some sort of project that helps young people get these behaviors and get them into jobs? And I think that's really been the birth of Harambee, and the principle still remains today, is that we continue to spend quite a bit of time, albeit now at a much bigger scale at a national level, which I'll talk to in a bit, but spending time understanding where are the jobs for young people. Because we have a jobs crisis in this country. Where are these jobs that we're talking about? And how do you make sure that when you do find those jobs, the young people are ready to actually get them? So that's really our history as Harambee. We've worked with different levels of employers to date. We've got we've managed to support nearly 3,000 employers in the country fill their vacancies. We've got nearly 5 million young people on our platform, the SA Youth platform. Yes, and I'll chat to you a little bit about the SA Youth platform. And those 5 million young people have managed to connect to over 1.6 million opportunities in the 15 years that we've been around. So, yeah, we feel like we've moved from really being very specific in the problem that we're trying to solve, and we continue to talk about falling in love with the problem, so refining your problem statement as opposed to falling in love with the solutions that you create, because youth unemployment is a wicked problem. It's a dynamic problem. It keeps changing. It's got multiple roots. So if you come with a set framework, you actually can't solve it because it keeps changing. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, let's start with those 5 companies. Who are they? I mean, I think they deserve a shout out.
I should give them a shout out. So it was 4 insurance houses, Clientele, Hollard, Teleshore, Direct Access, and a very creative and passionate hospitality business, many of you know, Nando's, who came together to say, how do we solve this problem first for us, but then that kind of avalanched into how do we solve this problem for the country.
And then in the 15 years, what are some of the key highlights that you guys have been able to achieve?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've spoken to you about some of the numbers, but I would say in the 15 years, the first kind of 15, the first 5 years of the organization was the proof of concept phase. We were able to secure some funding from government. And interestingly, it wasn't only funding, it was a partnership with government. We were one of the first recipients of the catalytic fund from the Jobs Fund, which is an agency within GTAC in National Treasury. And so in that 5 years, we're really trying to prove this concept, right? It was a hypothesis. It was to say, can you get these young people into work? What are the barriers that are, restricting them from gaining access into the jobs? And what are the linkages that you can build to do that? And we spoke at the time, in this first 5 years, we really developed what we're calling close the gap programs. You help young people close the job specific gap. So you're not training or skilling for the sake of skilling. You're skilling for what employers need because you've understood that, and now you can do that. So the first 5 years was really building that momentum. The next 5 years were from about 2026 all the way to just before COVID, was us. Did I say 2016 to just before COVID, was us actually working quite intently, not only with the employers, building an employer-based database that we have, but it was also actually partnering with government at a local level with the city of Johannesburg. We had a program called Vulindlela Jozi, where we saw young people in Johannesburg between 2014 and about 2016. Nearly 200,000 young people benefited from that program. That was a partnership with the city. And then in 2017, we got into a partnership with the province of Gauteng in a program called Tsepa 1 Million. And again, we're providing the plumbing, the support in the background of young people being able to gain visibility and have access to these opportunities across the province, but with different partners.
Did you guys meet that target?
That target we didn't meet. We came close to that target, the 1 million target, because that was the whole thing. Right?
Yeah.
Except for 1 million. So we came very close to that target, but I think the part of the reasons why we didn't meet that target was just the complexities of working in these big partnerships, right? Because, we had to hold some of our partners accountable, and some of our partners were even in government, and we didn't have the right structures and mechanisms effectively to be able to hold our partners accountable. So if I recall, I think we got to about 850,000 young people who were connected. That's a big,
that's a solid 85%.
It's 85% is a pass rate. It's not the 30% pass, but we'll take 85%. But there were still some gaps, especially in the coordination of government programs being made visible through this CEPA 1 million program. So, and it was just no coordination, but we learned our lessons. So while we were doing that, Business Leadership South Africa took this project, basically, this Harambee and its partners, which was a public-private partnership, right? It was us working with business to employ, it was government to employ, but also government to fund. It was civil society organizations to help in training and readying these young people, but also to employ, because a lot of NGOs and community-based organizations hire young people. And so that leads me to the third phase of kind of our big achievements, which is now when we hit in 2018, BLSA took this model, what we call a pathway management model, to the Job Summit, where the presidency and the president actually adopted it and said, we need to do this for the whole country. Why are we only doing it in Gauteng? This thing has to be massified. It has to be. And so in 2021, he then launched through the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention, PYEI, he launched this as one of the key pillars that you have to have pathway management in the country, along many other pillars that we can always chat about.
And then you mentioned the SA platform, SA Youth platform.
Yes.
What's that?
Okay, great question. So SA Youth platform is a two-pronged platform. It's on one hand, it's employer facing, right? So you have to understand where the jobs are. So it allows employers to go and log in and register and find talent when they need it. On the other hand, it's a mobi-site that is young people facing. It's a free mobi-site for young people. They don't have to pay anything when they accessing it. That allows young people to, in the comfort of their own homes really, be able to look for opportunities. It's not an app, it's a mobi-site. And these were some of the very intentional things that we built. I'll tell you, because the technical people here understand. An app requires you to download it, which requires typically data. A mobi-site is like a web address that you go to. So you'll go to sayouth.mobi. Any young person can go to sayouth.mobi and then register and yeah. So it works like you're on the internet, but it doesn't charge you to be on the internet on your phone. You get what I mean? So SA Youth Mobi is then, we've built the algorithms of all the insights that we've learned over the years. We've built those into the algorithm, the matching platform. So when an employer puts their opportunities there, it matches the best young people to those opportunities, but it also gives those young people an opportunity to say, I opt in and I want to apply to these opportunities. That's really at the heart of what the platform does.
And then with regards to the challenge you mentioned earlier, that companies would have an issue in terms of, determining behavior, are they on time, attitude, etc. How have you guys addressed that? How do you deal with that? Because I assume the CV isn't going to say, I come on time.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that in the different phases, we've dealt with that differently. So in the beginning, we were doing those close the gap programs. We the ones that were running, we had thousands of young people going through Harambee sites, Harambee offices, and going into these work readiness bridges, we call them. And I'll give you a practical example of one, and it includes young women. So at the time, we worked with a client in the south of Johannesburg, who was a manufacturing steel client. So you can imagine the type of space that is, you in overalls the whole day, you carrying heavy things, you lifting steel, whatever else that you needed to do there. And not surprisingly, only young men could get into that program because typically, it's a man's job, right? So we had to actually test that assumption, and because we were seeing, the type of jobs that they're doing is actually not that much heavy lifting. It's assumed that just because you work for a steel company, you're going to be carrying some heavy things. And going into the detail in the conversation with the client, we realized it didn't. So we created a bridge. Young people did have to lift things, but they didn't have to lift anything more than like 20 kilograms. So we created basically a fitness bridge. We hired a fitness coach and got young people, and it was mostly young women. And it was a fantastic success story because it showed that some of the barriers that exist are a bit artificial, right? Or biases or stereotypes that we have.
Fallacies.
Right? Or fallacies. So it's important to kind of test. And we realized how critical then our role in advocating with employers was to say, you as employers have to hire inclusively. Now, to come back to your question about how we do that work readiness now, obviously, we don't have enough resources to create 1,000 fitness bridges or what have you. But we do work with a great lot of partners now. So as part of the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention, we got appointed as the National Pathway Manager. That means that we have to think about enabling other partners, other organizations that can do that kind of work, right? We keep bringing the demand side intelligence, where the jobs are intelligence, and then sharing it with them to be able to ready young people for those opportunities. And I've got a ton of examples that I can share with you around that.
Those largely have been the challenges that are faced on the side of the employer. When it comes to the potential employees and the youth that are looking for jobs, what are some of the barriers that they face?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fantastic question. Young people. So maybe let me just take a step back and say youth unemployment is not just a failure of government or a failure of employers not hiring or young people not being good enough. It's a wicked and very complex problem, right? It's a failure of the labor market. So when the labor market fails, it's because of many, many root causes that the labor market fails. One is that young people aren't seen to have the right skills, right? So you can speak to 1,000 young people, they'd tell you that I didn't even get to the interview phase because maybe someone looked at my CV and it was too empty for them to see anything. So one of the critical barriers that we know is how do we help young people be able to talk about themselves and the competencies and the skills that they have. Because just because you haven't worked before formally doesn't mean that you don't have work-ready behaviors or work-ready skills. And so we have launched online CV actually on SA Youth that uses different tools that we assess young people in. So for example, instead of asking you just what was your maths mark in matric, which I don't know, TJ, if you're confident to answer that question, but we'll let you do...
I got a bachelor pass, but let's leave it there.
We'll let you do a learning potential assessment. It's a screener that tests your fluid intelligence, your ability to grasp new concepts. And we realized just by doing that, instead of looking at math marks, which is what employers technically use to check the same thing, what's your problem solving, what's your ability, you open up an additional 20% pool for employers by using different proxies. And we've done the same thing with English, we've done the same thing with other behaviors. So when you go onto the platform, you go through all these tools and it almost creates a different kind of CV. We call it the SA Youth CV. That is a much stronger signal for employers, because we realized that young employers weren't getting the right signals of what young people are competent at doing. And so that's one barrier. But there are a multitude of other barriers. There's a ton of scams in the country. For young women, you know, it's not secure. It's unsafe to go look for jobs. You know, never mind the fact that they're at home doing childcare duties and looking after the household, which is unpaid, by the way, but it's work. But there's multitudes of these barriers. We've, you know, the apartheid spatial dynamics still affect us, right? Transport. The reason why we've got, you know, young people right now, the cost of looking for a job, I think the last research I saw was almost 1,500 rand. So it's a full-time job to look for a job, right? And you're not getting paid for that. So you taking all of those confounding factors, and it then creates quite an explosive crisis, which is why we are where we are.
You touched on scams.
Yes.
And we've seen in the news, there are a lot of scams in different countries. What happens there? How?
I mean, I think it's young people want jobs. The scammers know that young people are keen. They're desperate in some cases. They just want to kind of earn. And so opportunistically, I suppose, they go and they create these things. Now, one of the things that SA Youth and its partners of a network have been in this network that I was describing earlier have been able to do is to create almost like verified partners, right? So you know when you go to this platform, these are real jobs. And when there aren't jobs, and we've had, for example, on our own platform, scammers come and try to recruit young people on the platform. And we've got multitudes of security gates or, ways to verify partners. But even with that, we've had to deal with it. And, we've been very swift and we communicate very clearly. Luckily, nobody was hurt or taken to Russia or wherever. But I think that that's the nature of the ecosystem that we're in, is that people are always going to be taking chances. And there are many ways that young people are abused on this journey of looking for jobs. I mean, there's a heartbreaking story that I always tell. Many years when I just started actually at Harambee, we used to go to.
How long ago was that?
Ish, I don't want to do it.
You are bold, but continue.
No, it's about 12 years ago now, and I was playing a very different role there. We would go out into communities and find young people. We would run the assessments, and we'd have them in a room and do some work readiness interventions with them. And at the end of this day, and obviously there were jobs that we were going there with, this young woman then was basically propositioning me for sex, because that's the currency, I think, in that context that has been used, that she's so used to. This is how you get the job. This is how. So I think it's also, this crisis has created a significant social, moral issue for us in our communities, because those who have a little bit of power abuse it. And especially young women are at the worst kind of brunt of that.
How would you advise a young woman to navigate that situation?
Which situation are you
The
referring?
one of, here's an opportunity, I'd like this job, I qualify, I meet the requirements, I'm here, but this guy would like me to give it up.
Yeah, I mean,
Is there something
it's
that can be done?
it's a difficult thing, and it all depends on who's the employer. And many employers do have whistleblower spaces, but it's not a lot, actually. It's not a lot that you can go and blow a whistle when you're getting a manager that's propositioning you for that. But it's really, my advice would be, don't do it. Don't do it. Look for another job, because if you're going into a job and that's the first thing you have to do, can you imagine what you're going to have to do throughout the job? And my sense is that it doesn't end there, and it's not something that we should encourage. It's like when a cop stops you and asks you for a bribe, right? And if you give them the bribe, you're adding to the problem. And so, and I understand that it's easier said than done. If you're a young person who's got a lot of problems and you're looking for a job and you're there, you might make a different call. But, my preference would be join sayouth.mobi, go apply for thousands of other jobs that you might find there, and rather go for one that doesn't ask you to abuse your own moral standards to be able to get.
But maybe there's also an opportunity there for you guys to have a whistleblowing function for your partners, or people that use them.
Oh, that's a great idea, actually. Yeah, because we've got a whistleblower thing for us as an organization, and we, being at the level of where we are in terms of the country, we want to make sure that we're always doing the right thing, even when nobody's watching. And but I like your suggestion. I'll take it up.
I'm gonna send an invoice for that. No, and I guess maybe we should have started here. With regards to labor failures, I know, and we've touched on the different components on it, but what's the core? How did we get here as a country to have, I think, 2/3 of our youth unemployed?
So, TJ, we recently commissioned some research about 2 years ago that showed three things. One was GDP growth from 2008 till 2014 till 2024.
So ready to start again?
Okay. GDP growth. One trend line is GDP growth.
Okay.
From 2008 to date. The other trend line is over 35s working in that same period. And the other line is under 35s working in that same period.
Okay. And these are primarily Zuma years, but let's not
Yes,
that.
yes, of course. I mean, these are the lost years, as it would be. What we realized, and the big insight from that, was actually the GDP growth, while it's been slow, and I know there's a lot of criticism about how slow we've been growing, but I actually feel very bullish that there's a lot of work that's been put in place by the likes of the Operation Vulindlela team and the presidency, who have unlocked, when last did you feel load shedding, who have unlocked electricity, who are working on the ports, who are working on a lot of kind of key priorities to grow the economy. So the first thing is to say the economy has to keep on growing. The growth of the economy is well correlated with people over 35 getting jobs. So while there's been small slumps during COVID, for example, we've seen that when the GDP grows, people over 35 remain employed. But the scary part was looking at the young people line. In that period, the young people, even though GDP has steadily grown, and hasn't been like crazy growth, it's been like on average 1.7 or something percent. Young people have lost jobs, even in sectors where there are entry-level jobs that existed and that young people could get. So for us, one of the key reasons, to come back to your question, is GDP, right? We have to see better growth if you want jobs, you want to see more growth. So that's a key thing, but we know that growth alone is not enough. It's an insufficient condition for young people to thrive and to get working and get jobs. We need a lot more intentionality, and we've actually outlined some of the levers that we feel like you can press alongside with growing the GDP that will see the situation looking very different in the next 5 to 10 years, if we're talking about that. So you have to make sure employers are hiring these young people and seeing their potential, which is the stuff we've just spoken about. You have to look at growth sectors, there's sectors like digital, the stuff that you guys are doing. Podcasting is a different kind of space. You have to look at green economies. You have to look at different spaces where net new jobs that the economy didn't know 5 years ago will now exist. We have to really think about what it takes to get young people self-employed. What are the support structures and scaffolding that needs to be in place to ensure that young people who have an inkling of self-employment and entrepreneurship can actually become good and thriving entrepreneurs, and then hire other young people ideally. And then you have to also leverage public employment programs. Government spends a ton of money. The fiscus spends billions on programs that are meant to be social protection programs that provide some service but keep money in the pockets of young people. And so you have to do all of that to be able to kind of get it right. And I know I'm coming to the answer almost as opposed to the problems, but I think the answer and the problems are similar.
Yeah,
because,
naturally.
yes, the answer is responding to all the lessons that we've learned about what's not working. It's because we don't have employers, and employers is not just business. Employers, government is also an employer, I mentioned across the board. You have to have employers hiring inclusively. You have to make sure that you're attracting new investments into the country and, new jobs effectively into the country. You have to drive self-employment. I mean, an interesting fact about this self-employment is that our economy's arc is about 50% formal employment, 30% unemployment, say 35% unemployment, and 15% in informal. So 50% are in the formal. About 35% are unemployed.
Okay.
And about 15%
Informal, okay.
are informal. Now, most other African countries are about 45, 45, 10. So 45 in the formal, 45 in
Unemployed.
informal.
Informal.
So a
Okay.
lot of African markets have a lot more activity in the informal space, and then less people than are unemployed in that way. And I mean, I don't know if you heard last year, I think the CEO of Capitec,
The former CEO.
former CEO of Capitec mentioned, and other people actually came and supported that around self-employment. And they were talking about, there's a lot of activity happening in the informal space, and it's not well measured. And I don't totally disagree, but I do think we have to measure it, we have to classify it, and then we have to articulate the right kinds of support that you can do to grow people in those spaces. Because a young woman selling amakwenya and ditamati lemaskopasi at the corner, you can't say is an entrepreneur, right? It's subsistence. They're trying to feed their family. But because they've got what it takes, they know how to do some financial management, they know stock, they know,
perspective.
right? How do you then support them to kind of go to their next step?
With regards to entrepreneurship, right? You have mentioned it's one of the key things that's going to help us grow jobs. And then there's a chat of the informal and the township economy. How real of a chat is that? The township economy creating jobs, and like, should they even be a separate economy?
Well, it exists. Township economies exist. The question is, how do you better support township economies and the informal? And I think we've had maybe philosophical debates for a while in the country around how, do you formalize the informal, or what's the story? And I mean, my personal stance on it is that we have to understand how the township economies work. We have to understand where they're informal, because township economies and what economic activity looks like in rural areas, for example, looks very different, right? And you can support them very differently. For instance, if you go to rural places, rural parts of the country, the biggest thing that people have is a ton of land. So you could say agriculture could be an opportunity, but there are a ton of other barriers to access to markets. So if I plant my cabbages, where am I going to sell them to? So we have to look at programs that are responding to the issues based on where young people are. So especially in self-employment. In townships, for instance, if you go to Soweto, if you go to Alexandra, you'll find mechanics fixing things, right? You'll find, are there programs that are structured to be helping young people become those mechanics, or apprentice under a mechanic, and then, kind of build onto that? So people need things fixed all the time. We talk about installation, repair, and maintenance as a potential sector. And you need artisanal skills for that. These are things that AI is not going to take away. I know people, worry about, but you always need someone to fix your phone, and you always need someone to fix something. So I think that these economies exist. To the point earlier I made that, those remarks about the informal were not unsubstantiated. It's because there is activity, but the question is, do we understand these activities enough to know how to catalyze or amplify the things that are working, and the things that aren't working will die a natural death, is typically, yeah.
And I'm happy you used some of the examples that you did,
Yeah.
particularly around fixing phones and add on to say barbershops, salons, etc.
Exactly.
And
Services. And, yeah.
that's where you largely have foreigners, legal, illegal, different chat. What role does immigration, illegal, legal, play in unemployment?
Yeah.
Yeah, for South Africans in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer that immigrants, the world is full of immigrants. I mean, there was an ad many years ago that showed the Khoisan being the first people. All of us here in South Africa are like visitors, right? We found the Khoisan here. So it's a silly example to say that I think we have to ensure that people enter our country legally so that we can manage the populace. That's critical. So people who are here not legally should go back home. If we can figure out that, the law has to take its course and ensure that people are going back home. But I do think that there are some really exciting models that if we were thinking like that, we could learn from some of the immigrants. So if you take the Spaza shops, in many communities, Spaza shops are now taken by my friend, the Ethiopian guys from, and the way they run these, the reason why they're thriving is because the business model works.
Makes sense.
The business makes sense. It's not because they're immigrants. It's because the business makes sense. So whether it's the way they procure, right, large joint procuring, or whether it's the way I'm not sure of the mechanics, but I think we need to go into these sectors with almost like an appreciative inquiry approach, not a fear and scarcity like they taking our jobs approach, because then we actually are not going to learn what it takes to win. I was in the US recently and I got into an Uber and I was talking to this Ethiopian guy. That's why I'm thinking of him. And I told him, and he's like, "Where are you from, my friend?" I'm like, "I'm from South Africa." And he's like, "My whole family is making tons of money there," right? So, and I laughed because it just landed. And he was saying he's driving an Uber in the US and he's not making nearly half as what. So I think there's real opportunity in many of these sectors for us, organizations like us and our partners, to think very creatively about how we tap into these models and share with our people. But also, I think for young people themselves to be approaching those spaces with more that curiosity than entitlement of, this belongs to me.
On the other end, when it comes to private-public partnerships, and the quality of jobs that those have produced. I remember there's this clip one of these radio stations play where if you get 10 people to dig a hole and another 10 to cover that hole, it's not jobs, it's keeping people busy. When it comes to the quality of job and job opportunities, there's also a discourse around the difference between those.
Yes.
How are we doing there and how could we do better?
Yeah. So, I mean, public employment programs are critical to our economy. We saw that during COVID, they were the programs that were keeping the lights on in the country. If we didn't have those programs, especially for young people, we'd be in real trouble. I mean, and there are different kinds of programs in public employment. The presidential employment stimulus, for instance, has run programs like the DBE Teachers Assistance Program. I don't know if you've heard about that, but and recently that program took in nearly 200,000 kids into being education and teaching assistants, which is critical for the education system, for teachers who are trying to teach. And I think during COVID, it was even more amplified because it was so difficult to kind of coordinate. There are programs like the Social Employment Fund, which is also built, significant projects that have had, even the agriculture projects that I was describing, they've done fantastic work in building that out. So we've seen that good public employment programs can play multiple roles. Now, they were never meant to be the stabilizer of the economy. They were meant to be opportunities for social protection, right? To social protection, you provide some services to communities, you give young people an opportunity to serve their communities, right? Youth service, this was a thing. And that continues to be a critical thing that they bring. But now they also income for young people, right? They're really important income. So, those young people, I think we spent nearly 6 billion on the 200,000 young people as a fiscus who were employed by the Department of Basic Education. So it's big money, right? It's big money that you're ingesting not only into young people's pockets, but it affects the households, it affects the communities, and etc.
Puts money into circulation.
Exactly, it circulates money. So I think we have to have well-run public employment programs, and I think the public employment space requires reform. And actually, the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, Minister McPherson, alongside with the Deputy President, lead an interministerial committee that's specifically looking at how do you reform public employment? Because one of the biggest public employment programs that many of the people, when you're talking about digging holes, I know you're talking about EPWP, right?
Yes.
That's one of the biggest programs in the country. And there's many things, and the minister went actually on a listening tour in this last year. One of the biggest things, and this is where we also partnering with him and his department to try and affect this reform. One of the biggest things is transparency when you're recruiting for these programs, right? Many young people don't even get to see where's the EPWP vacancy because you either need to know a counselor or a friend and they become political currency. So how do you do that? And we believe that technologies like sayouth.mobi have been fantastic actually in democratizing the opportunity in these programs for young people. Two is then the nature of how the program works, the design of the program. So what we learned from young people that were coming out of the DBE program is that the type of skills they learned in 6 months could position them really well to being like admin assistants and, secretaries, reception, that kind of thing. So I'm using that as an example to say these programs not only give young people income when they most need it, they also serve society in providing services that are critical, like education, teachers. And more importantly, they also give the young people skills that can be transferable potentially to helping them gain access to employment. We know that previous work experience is one of the biggest predictors of getting your next job. And so they really are playing an intricate connective role in that. But we know they're short-term, they're never going to last. So how do we manage those young people through those pathways to ensure that they're transitioning into something more sustainable?
How do we stop the exploitation of it, particularly from the employer side? I mean, there are many times you'd hear of someone that's on their third or fourth internship. Like, okay, how many internships can you do? But also the step after that in terms of getting a salary that is one that will enable you to go past just like living and getting by and building and supporting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important and difficult question, to be honest, TJ, because young people go from internship to internship not because they want to, but just because that's what's available, right? And the system, in a way, is not self-checking. So we don't have a system that can check that, oh, TJ, you were in the other program just last year and another program, and because the system doesn't effectively talk to each other. Now, there's some exciting developments that we're seeing around the work, again, the presidency is doing in the PMO, which is building public infrastructure, digital public infrastructure, through the Digital Services Unit that works very closely with communications and DCDT technology. DCDT, I think that's DCD. I think that's the department, but the Department of Communications.
Oh, okay. GCIS.
No, that's a DC. It is DCDT, but effectively,
We'll Google it.
effectively, what they are doing is trying to connect the different government departments so that if you, for example, that we can verify your ID, something as simple as that you need to be you need Home Affairs to be able to verify ID. If you want to check someone has a criminal record, you need SAPS. Is there a way that through technology, I mean, we're in AI land, we should be able to do that. And we're learning from other countries, actually. The team did an expedition to India and Brazil and other places where they saw how they did their DPI developments and how they did. The point I'm making is, if you build some of the underlying connections that are required from a digital public infrastructure point of view, one, you'll be able to see better how young people are moving through the economy. So that is absolutely critical, we believe. And we see ourselves, SA Youth, and the platform that we build as really one of those public goods that can be contributed to that. So effectively, it's a lot more difficult to then say, how do young people progress once they are in work? Especially because, you know, if they're coming into these short-term roles, not all employers have designed that as a pipeline into the job, right? So you might find that an employer says, I'm going to take 100 kids into an internship because I want my BE points and other things. But I'm actually only going to absorb 20% because that's all I need. Now, we work with partners like the Youth Employment Service, yes, who have been critical in taking the BEE as a policy instrument and working with employers to answer exactly that question, to say, how do you provide young people with not only short-term opportunities, but actually longer-term opportunities, 12, 24 months, and how do you keep them in that system? And again, it goes back to my point earlier to say, you will absolutely need a village to solve this problem, right? It's because of this wickedness and its complexity, you need organizations like YES doing that. You need organizations like the NYDA providing both youth service and grant startups for young people who want to start their businesses. You need employers in business hiring. You need BUSA, BLSA, Business for South Africa, talking to their members and saying, hire these young people because they are talent for our country. And you need government playing a coordinative oversight, but also an unlocking role where a simple example which happened recently is the ETA, Electronic Travel Visa.
Okay. Oh, more face, yeah.
Yes, which has recently been unlocked effectively based on the work that government has been doing. And in unlocking an electronic visa, what you create is a real opportunity for many people from many countries now to come visit South Africa. You're increasing the jobs in tourism as a sector, which means that young people will get to work. So I think those are the knock-on effects and those kind of roles that I see different partners playing in this space.
In closing, what policy, regulation, law would you change, introduce, take away to assist in getting our youth jobs?
Sure. I mean, I don't think there's one. I think it's difficult to come to one because
2, 3.
yeah, I think one, and maybe it's not a policy, but I think the first one is a way to really understand where the jobs are. I think that, and it's a joint understanding of where earning, and let me use a different thing, where young people could earn. And it's not a policy as much as a public-private partnership approach to, as a country, where are the areas of opportunity for young people to work. So I think we need a joint vision and joint understanding for young people in that way. I think there have been different documents that have been developed. I know there's an integrated youth development strategy. I know, but all of these things sit in disparate spaces, are not very well understood. So my first sense is we almost need to build it to a movement level to say what's the vision, the joint vision that as a country, regardless of where you sit in government, in civil society, or in business, we are seeing that this is the areas of opportunities to solve that. A very specific, maybe that could be a policy thing, is what is skilling young people for the jobs that exist or the jobs that we know will exist. Now, having said that, employers can change their minds a lot in terms of what they need, right? So we know,
yeah, which is also dictated by the market and their defense.
Exactly. So it has to be live intelligence of what the employers need. It can't be static, right? And I think that's maybe some of the criticism in the past of things like the CETAs system, right, in higher education and training, to say CETAs may have been a bit too static in the way they approach. So by the time the funding these programs, the market has shifted and onto the next thing.
And there are a million of them.
Exactly. Yeah. And we call this demand-led skilling. You have to skill based on where the jobs are, where the demand is. That allows you to answer very specific questions. I'll give you a very small example here because I think this is a powerful story. One of our partners is called the Collective X, and Collective X is an organization that's evolved actually from a public-private partnership, bringing organizations that were doing their own kind of thing, trying to fill digital skills in the Western Cape to what government and everyone was doing in Gauteng. But the Collective X thinks of where the jobs in the digital sector are going to come from. And they've mapped up about 60,000, I think, in the next 5 years. High quality jobs, like really, really high quality jobs in like cybersecurity, coding, product development, all of these things. Then they go work with partners who can ready young people for specifically those kind of things. So those who know, you might need 6 months of AWS or technical people know. AWS is like Amazon Web Services or Google. So type of languages, right? The point is they know that you no longer need a 4-year degree from UCT to work. And one of the young women actually, incidentally from Cape Town, from Khayelitsha, went through a 1-year work readiness work integrated learning with the Collective X. They basically took 6 months was theoretical training, and the balance of that 6 months was her working on an active client, so was incubated, working on it. When she left that program, obviously in that 1 year she was earning a stipend. When she left that program, she was absorbed. They've got 90% absorption rate, as opposed to the 20% I was mentioning earlier. Her starting salary was 40,000 Rand, entry-level work. Now, you can imagine how much of an impact that can have for a family, right? For any of us, 40 grand would be a good amount of money. So I think that would be a critical area. So if I were to pick those two things, I think a joint vision, seeing where we're going. 2, an aligned understanding of how you are skilling for where the jobs are. And maybe 3, really leveraging technology. Technology as an amplifier of the partnerships that we've created. And I mentioned DPI and public infrastructure. And I think that for me is very exciting. I feel like it's almost like TJ readying the ground. You know, come from a farming community. So you dig, you ready the ground, and then things start to grow. And I think we can't anticipate some of the things that will grow if we just have the right fertile ground as a country. And I think we could unlock some amazing creativity from our youth. We could unlock the next unicorns could be coming. I mean, we know we've got some already, but could be coming from this country and this continent. And I think those, for me, apply actually throughout the continent. I think there's very similar ways that you could apply that in different parts.
So now, where do our viewers, whether they're employers or employees or potential employees, how do they get involved?
Great. So for employers, sayouth.co.za, you can reach out to us directly to hire and find talent.
I thought you said fire for a moment.
No, to find real talent and young people that we feel like will contribute significantly to our organization. So sayouth.co.za is a fantastic place to start for employers. We've got teams that will support you and hold your hand through the way if you need any kind of support. This applies to SMEs, anyone who wants to hire. We really encourage to go to the platform. For young people is sayouth.mobi. It's the free mobi-site, and it's fantastic. I've got a profile on sayouth back when I was a youth. Now the times have changed. But I was looking at the CV and all of those things. I think these are really important contributions, and they enable you, to apply multiple times. They make your job easier. Remember I said looking for a job is a job in itself, which I heard from a young person, by the way. And I do think this enables their work to be a lot easier, given that they're not getting paid for that job.
Okay. Thank you for making time. Thank you for all the work you've done in terms of getting me and my people employed as youth. Yes, I'm youth. Congratulations also.
Thank you. Thanks, TJ, and thanks to your listeners.
Guys, like, subscribe, share, comment, get involved. Palatable Politics.